So we're eating fresh noni. This is my friend Nathaniel and Keone. We're eating fresh noni. This is what you do, by the way. Everyone aware of noni fruit, Moringa citrifolia? Who here has ever bitten it straight? Who's going to do it again? Right? Who's ever healed something topically with it? Right? I would say this about noni. It is likely the most powerful natural medicine, the most powerful medicinal food in the world. I can stand behind that. I really, truly, honestly believe that. I mean, it's obviously one of the great medicines of the Polynesian people, the Polynesian Triangle and the South Pacific Islanders. But it's so much more than I ever realized it was. You know, the hype, like the little noni drinks and all that I got into. I thought it was cute or whatever. It was some kind of exotic thing. But then I started connecting with noni. I was like, oh, whoa, this is some kind of medicine right here. And when you bite into it, whoa, it's like spicy. It tastes kind of how you expect it to taste, but then it's like the spice, the alkaloids. Or just like like the medicine, the alkaloids, the medicine just kind of like, whoa, it's powerful. I was in Nicaragua. I was leading a 7-day detoxification retreat, and we're walking around the farm, and you know, you got like 25 people from all over the place, and most of them, they never seen a noni. They don't even know what this stuff is, right? So I just picked up a noni, and I was like, hey, you want to know what you do with this? I was like, here, you just take a big bite out of it. And you just dive right in, right? I was like, this is the most amazing medicine. It's the most amazing cure-all. Polysaccharides, your immune system, blah, blah, blah. I was just hammering them. I'm like, look, just take a big bite out of it. And I took a big bite, and then they did, and it was so funny. There's like, blah, blah. Some people were into it, right? But a lot of people were just like, oh, they couldn't take it. Powerful medicine. Let's go back to the periodic table now. Okay, so again, the minerals. Minerals are basically like, they're basically like tuning forks. They're tuning forks for consciousness. They're basically, they conduct frequencies. That's what they do, right? When you think of magnesium, you think of calcium, you think of potassium, you think of gold, you think of silver, platinum metals, ormus elements. They basically are transmitters or conductors of consciousness. Essentially, that's what they are. And the great agriculturist, the visionary, and the founder of biodynamic farming, Rudolf Steiner, he had a really interesting quote. He basically said that if we keep up with the degeneration or the demineralization of the soil, we will experience an epidemic of neurological disease. He said that 100 years ago, something around that, right? He was a visionary, and he was the one who created biodynamic farming. And I find that interesting, right? Because if you look at the statistics on neurological decline, it's something like 1/4 of the population. It might even be more. I would estimate that I would surmise that it's probably a little bit more, but that's crazy enough. 25% of the population has some form of neurological imbalance or degeneration, right? In my opinion, it comes down to minerals and understanding what foods have the highest minerals, or first of all, even understanding what minerals do what. Now, we can't go through the whole periodic table, but there are some things that I would like to point out. Let's talk about, right over here, zinc. I think if I'm gonna point out the most important things, I think zinc comes up. And by the way, each mineral minerals don't work isolated. They don't work by themselves. They work in conjunction with other minerals, right? Certain minerals pair up together and create a balanced equilibrium, or a dynamic polarity. So for example, you have potassium and sodium. You need both. If you have too much potassium, you become too watery, right? That's why Chinese medicine says, oh, too much raw food, damp, wet spleen, too moist, too wet. How do you work your way around that? Celery juice, salt water, having more salt in your diet, salty food. Because there tends to be among raw foodists that are like really in the fruit thing, really in more of that natural hygiene thing, little imbalance, too much water. There's a lot of potassium there, but not enough sodium. So they become too wet. And if you have a wet inner ecosystem, what do you think would thrive in that environment? What kind of organism would thrive in a damp, wet, swampy environment? Like yeast, mold, fungus, candida, right? That kind of thing. How do you work that out? Salt. Salt is one of the most powerful things. I mean, I've been digging into it even more, just thinking about all the radiation pollution that we have. There's a reason salt has always been used as an anti-radiation method. It's always been used as a radioprotective substance. Now I feel like I understand that whole process a little bit more. Because if you look at your body has receptors for specific minerals, right? Just the whole hormone thing. If you don't have the right lineup of the right hormones, then your receptors will get filled in with xenoestrogens. Same thing with minerals. If you don't have the correct minerals, or basically you don't have all the minerals in where they need to be, then there's going to be radioactive elements, what we call radioisotopes, which are just contaminated minerals, to make that simple. Radioactive contaminated minerals, right? So for example, cesium is probably the most influential, or the radio mineral, the radioisotope that we're most exposed to. It turns out that fits into the potassium receptor. So how do you deal with that? Well, one of the ways is that you actually use salt. There's something called biological transmutation. So minerals that start out, let's say you take in salt, it gets put out as potassium. Let me say it another way. In a lot of ways, potassium output is because of sodium input. Does that make sense? It's a cooling agent. It's endothermic. It's a cooling agent. It cools down the system. But salt is also drying. So if you have a damp, wet spleen or you're too wet, doing salt water or salty food or salt like celery juice, right? It can help dry the wetness to keep it in balance. That's an example. Zinc